Welcome to the Savvy Ladies Wednesday Wisdom webinar. I'm Maggie Montemuro, and I'm the Marketing Manager at Savvy Ladies. I would like to make a quick reminder that if you have any questions during the webinar, you can type them into the chat box or email info@savvyladies.org. Today's presenter is Jennifer Barrett, Chief Education Officer at Acorns and Editor-in-Chief of Grow, a personal finance site supported by Acorns. Jennifer is a digital strategist and award-winning financial journalist who is the co-author of 2 personal finance books. Before joining Acorns, Jennifer was personal finance editor for CNBC Digital, senior vice president and editor-in-chief at Daily Worth, and general manager of the Women and Teens group at Hearst Digital. Jennifer has covered financial topics for national publications, including the New York Times, and has also done multiple radio interviews and TV appearances, including The Today Show, MSNBC, and CNN. Thank you for joining us today, Jen, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much for having me on, Maggie. I am so thrilled to be talking with all of you today. This is a topic that's really close to my heart, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions and feedback at the end of the webinar. So I've been interviewing women across the country for the past couple years as I've been doing research for a book I'm working on, and I began to notice a pattern that was really frustrating. Time and time again, I would talk to women who were phenomenally successful in every other area of their lives, but they felt like complete financial failures. And I realized that part of this is the way that many of us have been conditioned to think about money, that it's complicated, that it's something we don't need to pay a lot of attention to, or it's something we can pay someone else to manage when we have a lot of it, or that it's superficial to focus on it. There are 100 messages or more that we've absorbed growing up. But I think one of the most dangerous and frankly untrue messages has been that women are not as good with money as men. And in fact, research shows the opposite is usually true. But regardless of what that message was and whether it was implicit or explicit, a lot of us grew up feeling like we weren't well equipped to take control of our finances and to build wealth. So I started to seek out women who are extremely successful financially to see if I could find some common traits among them. And what I found was that at some point, often in their teenage years or younger, they got this clear message that they would need to take care of themselves for life, that they could not depend on anyone else. And I know that sounds pretty negative or cynical, but really it's extraordinarily powerful, because what it did was set in motion a series of decisions and actions by each of these women after they left home that basically has set them up for life. And it's enabled them to have the life that they want without having to depend on anyone else. Essentially, they were brought up to think like breadwinners. So that's where I got the topic for today's conversation. And it's my intention that each of you leaves today with specific steps that you can take to be in that position and to be the boss of your life. So what does it mean to think like a breadwinner? So women who think like breadwinners behave differently. They manage their money differently, because when you believe that you need to be able to take care of yourself for life and maybe be in the position to take care of others too, you are going to make different decisions, better decisions. You're going to negotiate that salary, and that's something that too many of us don't do. In fact, you're more apt to negotiate everything, whether it's a cable bill or the purchase of a new home, because you want to save as much money as you can from the get-go to start building wealth and to take care of your future. And because, you know, the women that I spoke to, a lot of them didn't think of it as thinking like a breadwinner, but they thought of it in the way that they didn't want to wait for someone else to take care of them. They wanted to have the power and the freedom to walk away from a bad situation and know that they'd be okay financially, whether that was a job they hated or a bad relationship, or maybe they're living in a bad neighborhood. They never wanted to have to be in a position where they were making a decision that they were very uncomfortable with or that was not good for them for financial reasons. And they wanted to be in the position, not just to be able to take care of themselves, but maybe others too, their kids, a spouse. A lot of them said, you know, I don't know that my spouse is going to earn more than me. I don't want that to be a factor in my marriage and who I choose to marry. I want to be able to take care of myself. And some of them said they wanted to be in a position to help their parents. So that distinction, that thinking about being able to take care of themselves and also someone else, really informed every decision they made, because their goal was never just to get by. Their goal was to build wealth from the moment they left home. And you master this mindset and you will truly be the boss of your life. So I narrowed down the habits that I saw a lot of these women followed to 6 big habits that almost all of them had in common. So the first one, and this seems pretty obvious, I think, to a lot of people, is you have to know where your money's going. And while it seems obvious, I think a lot of us just don't do it. We get busy. We're not really paying attention to what we spend our money on a day-to-day basis. And then we look at our statements at the end of the month and we say, oh my God, where did my money go? I've had that happen to me, and I'm pretty good about where my money goes. But sometimes at the end of the week, I look at my balance and I think, God, what? I wasted money on that. And I still catch myself doing it. So the first thing you want to do if you want to take control of your money is get a snapshot of where your money is going now. And there are a few different ways you can do that, of course. The first thing is to add up all your monthly bills. And then you want to track your spending for anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. So for some people, your spending isn't going to change a lot week to week. So you can just look at 1 week. For others, your spending can change a lot. So it may make more sense to look at a broader time period. And I always recommend just take advantage of these free apps. Things like Mint, Level Money, and Wally are great apps. The next thing, once you've laid that out, so you write out all of your bills that you have to pay, and then you write out about how much you're spending on different categories. And that alone is often a really eye-opening experience. It certainly was for me, because you realize you're spending a lot more money on some things than you ever thought. And a lot of times, and this kind of goes into your goals and values, is that you realize you're not actually putting money toward the things that matter to you most. So that's why I talk about laying out your goals and your values. And what do I mean by values when it comes to money? It's really about figuring out what's important to you and what aligns with your values. So if you love traveling, then you want to make sure that you're putting money, directing money in ways that will help you do more of that. If you really value time spent with your family and experiences that you can share together, you want to make sure that more of your money is going toward that. So, and it's, we do it sort of implicitly, or we think we're doing it anyway, but a lot of us don't actually sit down and think like, is my money being spent in ways that really brings me joy and satisfaction and lines up with my values? And more times than not, it doesn't, because we tend to waste a lot of money on things just because we're not thinking about it. So once you become conscious of where your money is going, you can direct more of it in ways that really bring more fulfillment and value to you. And then think about what's negotiable. So there are some things that are kind of deal breakers, right, that you need to spend money on each month. And there are other things that are negotiable. And frankly, almost every one of your monthly bills is probably negotiable. You can negotiate your cable bill, you can negotiate your phone bill, you can call your credit card companies and negotiate down your rate. So all of those things are negotiable, and that's basically free money. And it just takes like a half an hour of your time to talk to them and try and negotiate those down. But it's often worth putting that time in. Other things that are negotiable: do you really need to eat out every day for lunch? If you're doing that, probably not. Things like that, where you're not really, is it bringing you that much more value to spend that extra money doing whatever? And maybe it is. Maybe you're so pressed for time, or maybe it's beneficial to meet new people at lunch. But it's worth asking those questions as you're looking at where your money is going. And then from there, you can map out a realistic spending and savings plan. The target, and I know this is going to seem really big to a lot of people, and it does to me too, is to aim to live on 80% of your income and set aside 20% for short and long-term goals. That is about where a lot of the women who are most successful landed. And that's not necessarily where they started. And frankly, that's not where I started either. But it's something to work your way towards. So start with whatever you can, because the fact is, your paycheck won't make you rich. It really matters so much less what you make than how you spend and save your money. Your paycheck won't make you rich, but your habits will make you rich. So you could be earning $1 million and spending $1 million, and you're living paycheck to paycheck. You could be earning 40 or 50,000 and setting aside a good chunk of your money every year, and you could hit $1 million. So it's really about the habits that you put into place, and whether you're saving 5% or 10% now matters less than the fact that you're saving and getting in the habit of doing that. So the second habit that I noticed was that almost all of these women paid themselves, I should say all of these women actually paid themselves first. And they made it automatic, because we know that we may have the best intentions, but then we don't necessarily follow through. On the flip side, we know, but behavioral economists will tell us time and time again that once you've actually set these things in place, you are very unlikely to change them. You have to be in a very bad place financially to go and undo an automatic deposit to your savings account, because you're not going to put that effort into it unless you really, really need that money now. So I would say, like, stretch yourself a little bit in the amount that you have automatically deposited into your savings account or investments. The idea is pay your bills and yourself first. So that means setting up automatic payments for every single one of the bills that you know you're going to have each month, anywhere it's possible. In my case, the only one I wasn't able to do it with was my cell phone bill, and there I set up an automatic text alert. So every time I get that text, I can just click on the link and pay it right then. But with your savings and investments, it's just as important that you make those automatic. In fact, maybe more important, because that's really where you're building wealth. So you decide what you want to contribute to your retirement accounts. You know, a lot of you probably have 401ks, so that's already being done for you. If you don't, you can set up an IRA, and we'll get to that. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then also set up money to go into your savings account. And if you've funded your retirement accounts already, you can also set up deposits into your investment accounts. Set up automatic payments for all of it, divide what's left by 4, and that's basically your weekly spending limit. So if you look at the total amount of money that's coming in income-wise each month, knock out your bills, knock out what you're going to contribute to your retirement savings and maybe investment accounts, and then you look at what's left. That's essentially your discretionary spending, and you can divide that by 4. And rather than writing down every single thing you spend, you can just make sure you stay inside that limit for the week. And that's what I end up doing, because I love creating budgets, but it's very hard for me to stick to them in the sense that I'm filling out every field month after month. But I've done that, and then I just create a little cushion for myself so that if something unexpected comes up, I've got some money for that, which is a perfect segue into the next habit, which is saving for the short term. The first thing you're going to do is set up an emergency fund. That is key. And any expert will tell you should aim for about 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. And the reason you want to do this right away, as many of you probably know, is that, frankly, emergency is kind of a misnomer for this fund. I think it probably does us more harm than good to call it an emergency fund, because we're not talking about major emergencies here. We're talking about anything that is outside the realm of your usual spending pattern. And that needs to be taken care of right away. So often it's something kind of negative. Your refrigerator breaks, or a pipe bursts, or you twist your ankle, or any of those things. It's really anything that would put you in a situation where you have to take care of it right away, and you might have to depend on a credit card to do it if you don't have that savings. Because what you're trying to avoid doing is using the credit card and having to pay that interest on top of everything else, because it just pulls you back about 3 notches. As you're trying to build wealth and set yourself up financially. So having 3 to 6 months worth of expenses, that is kind of the baseline, because that's about as long as people are out of work when they lose a job. So the other thing you use your emergency fund for, of course, is just to cover you if you ever do lose your job, so that you have some way to pay all your bills while you're looking for another one. I always recommend, and I'm not alone in putting it in a high yield savings account, which is kind of laughable right now because interest rates are so low. I think the average rate right now is 0.55% or something, which means you're basically earning like 55 cents on every $100, which is not a lot. But you can find higher rates, usually with online banks like Ally or credit unions. You can get annual percentage yields of 1% or more right now, which is not a lot, but it's double what you can get at some of the big banks. Always check for fees and restrictions. If you have a minimum account balance and you're going to be charged a fee, if you fall below that, that will basically erase anything you earn in interest. So it's always important to check into that, and then check for any fees that might be attached to it. And of course, don't touch it till you need it. Let it grow. And the other part of that is investing for, it's actually the midterm and the long term. And there's a hierarchy, of course, of investing. The first place you want to put that money is in your retirement accounts or tax advantaged accounts. Most people have a 401k. That's the first place to start. Ideally, you max it out. That number can seem overwhelming usually, because the max this year is 18,000 if you're 50 or younger, and 24,000 if you're over 50. So that's a lot of money. But you want to work your way toward that. And at the very minimum, make sure you're putting in at least as much to take advantage of any employer match. That's something that a lot of big employers are doing now. If you don't have access to a 401k, your best bet is an IRA. You can either do a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA. Either way, there are tax advantages. A Roth just lets you put in money after you've been taxed on it, and then you take it out tax-free. The traditional IRA works the other way around. You put money in, you're not taxed on the gains, but you pay taxes when you take it out. Another advantage of an IRA is that it serves as a good backup savings account in a lot of ways. If you've got because you can take it out for a couple things and not have to pay fees on it. You can use it for the purchase of your first home. You can use it for going back to school. You can use it for some medical expenses. So in a lot of ways, it's great for a lot of reasons. It's a perfect retirement vehicle, but it's also something to keep in mind if you do plan to buy a home or go back to school, that this is a place where you can put your money where it can go tax-free, and then you can take some of it out without being penalized. Wherever you put your money, there are two goals really in order to get the most for it, and that is investing in low-cost funds and funds that are well diversified. So generally speaking, as a benchmark, when you are looking to invest in a fund, you want to ask what the expense ratio is. And for most funds that are passive, which just means often that they mirror an index like the S&P 500, and that you don't have someone in there who's actively managing the fund, you want to look for an expense ratio that's 0.25% or less. And for an actively managed fund, you want to look for one that's probably about 0.5% or less. So you're always going to have to pay a fee, but some of these charge 1 to 2%, and that can just eat right into your returns in a big way. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars over the long term. So it's really worth looking at that. And then diversifying your portfolio is important, for reasons that are pretty clear. You want to minimize your risk, right? If one goes up, or one goes down, you're hoping that another one goes up and it sort of balances out. So you want to invest in a lot of different asset classes, which just means stocks and bonds and real estate. And then different types within each of those. So you're looking at like large companies, small companies, companies based in the US, companies based overseas, corporate bonds, government bonds. Basically trying to get a mix of as much as you can in your portfolio so that you're hedging your bets, so that at all times, if something goes down, something else is likely to go up, and it minimizes your risk. Another thing that all these financially successful women I interviewed do is they pay their credit card bill in full each month. And that, again, probably seems pretty obvious, but a lot of us are used to carrying debt on our credit card. In fact, I pulled a couple stats here. The average American household with debt carries a $16,000 balance with an average interest rate right now of 15%. That's the average nationally. If you paid a 3% monthly minimum, it would take you 20 years to pay that off, and you would spend more than $11,000 in interest, which is just insane. $11,000 in interest on a $16,000 balance. So in the way that compounding can work in your favor when you're investing, and it works similarly to that. If you put in $16,000 and you have average returns, they're usually going to be about half that, but you can get returns that are that high, and it's just amazing. But when it works against you, it's terrible, and it drags you down, and it pushes you so much further back, and it makes it that much harder to dig out of that hole. So use your cards sparingly, just enough to keep them active, and you do need to use them every now and then, or credit card companies have now gotten in the habit of closing down accounts, which can hurt your score. Always pay the bills off before your interest kicks in. There is a common misconception that you need to carry a balance in order to keep your score high, and that's just not true. You can keep your score high by using your card and paying it off immediately. Credit card companies don't love that because they're not making a lot of money off of you, but it's the best thing you can do in order to keep your score high and also keep yourself in good shape financially. And another thing I always recommend is to check your credit report at least once a year. There's only one place you can do that for free that's backed by the government. That's annualcreditreport.com. You can get one free copy of each of 3 reports, meaning they come from Experian, TransUnion, and of course I'm forgetting the third one. It'll come to me. But there are three credit agencies, and you can get one from each of them. Equifax, sorry, is the last one. You can get one report from each of them once every 12 months. So you don't need to get all 3 of them at one time. I would just recommend getting one from one agency and then waiting a few months and getting one from another one. That way you're staying on top of your report and making sure there are no errors that might be putting your score down. And finally, the last habit that that a lot of these women had was that they were always looking to get the most value for their time and their money. And that's something I know I talked about at the beginning, but it's so important that I wanted to end the talk on it too, because so many of us don't put enough value on either, frankly. You know, we are too often unconscious spenders, and we just spend money and then without thinking about it and then wonder where it went. And just the act of paying a little more attention to what we spend often means we end up spending less. But more important than that, again, is the fact that when you're paying attention to where your money goes, you are more apt to put your money, to spend your money, I mean, in ways that are going to bring you more value and more satisfaction. So here's a simple exercise. The next time you're about to buy something, just stop and ask yourself if it's worth the money. Because honestly, sometimes that simple step can keep you from overspending. And more broadly, you want to think about whether an expense is worth the opportunity cost. So $200 spent on a dress today that you might wear a few times means $200 that you're not investing. It means $200 that you're not saving for your goals. That means you're not just missing out on the $200, but you're missing out on the interest and the returns you would have earned for this period too. So maybe the dress is worth it, but it's a really good exercise to put any expenditure that's over $100 through that filter. And it's also about valuing your time. And that means asking for what you're worth. It means saying no to requests that will strain you or that don't make sense. It means spending your time and money in ways that bring you joy and feed your soul. You know, having a breadwinner mindset, this idea of taking care of yourself and your needs and your future and being in a position to support the people and causes that you care about, that's a great place to be. So whether or not you're actually a breadwinner in your marriage, if you're married, is irrelevant. What you're really doing is ensuring that you will be in a position to have the life that you want. And ultimately, building wealth allows you to do more of what you already enjoy doing. You know, few people want to dramatically change their lives when they get more money. You just want to be able to do more of what you're already doing and put money and time into, you know, things that you really care about. One of the most important things you can do is be in a position where you have total control over the choices you make with your time and money. And that's really what being a breadwinner is all about. And that's being the boss of your life. So I hope all of you get to experience that. And I'm happy to take any questions from you.
Thanks, Jen. Just a reminder, if you have questions, you can type them into the chat box or email info@savvyladies.org. And one of the questions we had come in already is, I have completed a budget and I don't have enough to start an emergency fund. That money is going to my 401k account at work. If my choice is between an emergency fund or a 401k, isn't the 401k the better decision?
I would argue that your choice is never between the 401k and the emergency fund. And it shouldn't ever be a choice between those two. You might be looking at your budget and thinking, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. There's no room here for me to put some money into savings. But I would bet if you take a real hard look at where your money is going, you could probably find some places where you can free up, even if it's like $10 a week, $40 to $50 a month to start putting into a savings account. I agree, you should never divert it from your 401k, but I would bet a lot of money that you would be able to find other places where you can just free up a little bit of money here and there and put it into a savings account.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, do you have some suggestions for how to find inexpensive, well diversified funds?
I do. I actually am a big fan of what are called exchange traded funds or ETFs. They are like mutual funds, but they trade like a stock. So you can buy or sell them during the day. And just to preface this, this is when you have your own investment account. This is outside of a 401k, um, maybe not outside of an IRA, but certainly outside of a 401k, because there you're sort of given a menu of choices. But ETFs in general are a great place to start. And you can just Google ETFs and look at them, and you can find ETFs that reflect almost anything you can possibly imagine. This is something that's they've developed these over the last decade or so, and there are now literally hundreds of ETFs. I like to start with those that mirror the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Those are known as the benchmark indexes. And if you do nothing else but buy some index funds, you're typically, actually I shouldn't say, because the past, we always say, is not necessarily a predictor of the future. However, people like John Bogle, who runs Vanguard and has done very well successfully, that has been his strategy for life. He sort of invented the index fund and has done very well by it, because over time, though the benchmarks can go up and down, so far throughout history, they have always come back from any downturns and then continued on. So as long as you kept your money in long enough, you always got that money back and more. So that's a good place to start if you're just getting started investing. So that's looking for index funds, again, that mirror the S&P 500, Dow Jones Industrial Average, and other major indexes. Another benefit of investing in ETFs that do that is that the expense ratios are often very, very low. I think Vanguard has one, I want to say, that's 0.08%, which is, I mean, practically nothing compared to, if you look at some actively managed funds that are 1 or 2% or more in terms of fees.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question here is, I'd like to know if when we are a victim of identity theft and the credit score goes down, will it come up after the fraud is clear?
It will, but you probably need to stay on them. We've written about this in the past, and it's completely unfair, but your credit score will take a hit, and a lot of times it's on you to make sure that that gets cleared up. So you want to stay on top of all three of the credit rating agencies and make sure that's Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, and make sure that they have wiped that off of your credit report and that they have adjusted the score for FICO accordingly. By law, they are required to take it off your report. And if you see anything that's suspicious and report it to them, they have to take action. I think it's within 30 days at this point. So the government's cracked down a bit on them in that sense, so that they really are legally bound to investigate any reports of suspicious activity pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is, how much money would you suggest to have secure by the age of 35 before start investing and saving?
Before you start investing? Or are you asking how much money should you aim to have invested?
It says before you start investing.
I mean, in terms of saving, you want to have about 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. And one thing that I didn't get into, but is important to think of too when you're thinking of savings, is that beyond that, you want to set aside savings for your short-term goals, things like vacations that I talked about, or experiences you want to have with your family or friends. And you can set up separate savings accounts for each of those things, something separate from your emergency fund, and even call it, my Paris vacation 2017, because that can be really motivating if you do it. So there's not really a set amount. I would say once you've got your emergency fund pretty well established, then you can start investing. But actually, let me step back. You should always be investing in your retirement account. If you have a 401k or something at work, you should do that and also fund your savings account simultaneously. But if you're talking about setting up a separate investment account outside of that retirement account, I would wait until you have a good 3 to 6 months set aside in that emergency fund, and then start investing if you're talking about investing a significant amount each month. It's a tricky thing because you want to be both investing for your future and also making sure you're putting money into a savings account for the short term at the same time. So part of it is what you're comfortable with. You want to make sure you have enough in savings that you have a safety net, basically.
Okay, great. Next question we have is, my rent alone feels like it's 80% of my income.
You must live in New York.
Exactly. I'm in an expensive city and I never feel like I'm saving enough.
Sure.
What are some little things that I can do to live on less and save more?
I mean, I know you're not going to want to hear this, but getting a roommate or trying to find some place that's a little less expensive is one of the best things you could probably do for yourself if you're spending that percentage of your, or anywhere near that percentage of your paycheck on your rent. You know, usually they recommend that you spend 30 to 50% of your income on rent or mortgage payments. So if you're anywhere outside of that, and I know in New York where we tilt the balance because it is so expensive to live here, so I'm sympathetic. But you know, that's a getting a roommate or finding a situation that's a little bit less expensive can make such a huge difference and just take so much pressure off of you if you're feeling like you're living paycheck to paycheck. That said, there are also places where you can probably cut back on your spending. I mean, I'm the editor-in-chief at Grow, and we're doing this experiment now called Less is More, and we're all trying to cut back on what we call our budget bulges, which is places where we're spending a lot of money and without probably thinking about it, or we're thinking we probably aren't getting the value that we want from that expenditure. For me, it's I'm ordering lunch in all the time because I'm working crazy hours. So I wanted to stop. So we've all committed to cutting back on different things. And I think if you look at where your money is going, you can probably find some places like that too. It's like this bulge in your budget, right? Where you're spending a lot going out at night, or you're spending a lot ordering in. And if you can even cut that back like 10 to 20%, it can make a huge difference. And it's not hard to do it. You know, I had a friend who lost her job, and while she was looking for another one, she was super conscious of the money she was spending. And so she ended up collecting the names of just about every bar in the area that had happy hours, bars and restaurants. And so every time I met her, we just met for happy hour. And I, after a while, was like, wow, I've just cut my bill like by a third to a half every time I go out with you. Why am I not doing this all the time? Because I still have just as much fun. The food is just as good, and it's just we're going out half an hour earlier. That's a pretty small compromise to make. And so, if you start digging into your spending a little bit, you can often find things like that. And there are even compromises. Like instead of ordering lunch in, sometimes I buy a packaged lunch at the grocery store, which is still probably more expensive than it should be, but it's less expensive than ordering in every day. So I just, it's kind of baby steps. It's looking at where you can spend a little less without really feeling it.
Okay. And the last question we have here, is there a rule of thumb for how much should be put toward retirement accounts versus investment accounts?
There is. The common benchmark that a lot of financial advisors use is that you should be putting 10 to 15% of your income into your retirement account. Of course, that is a benchmark. So a lot of it depends really on how much you make and how much you want to be putting toward retirement. And the sooner you start, the better, because then you benefit from compounding. So if you start investing at like 23, 24, 25, you can put in a lot less and still benefit a lot more because you have the, you have the gift of time. And so you'll benefit a lot more from compounding. But generally speaking, you want to max out your retirement accounts. So that's $18,000. That's a lot, or it's $5,500 if you're maxing out your IRA, and try to do that before you start putting a lot of money into a regular investment account.
Okay, great. And Jen, did you want to talk a little bit about Grow?
Oh, I'm always happy to talk about Grow, but I knew we can give it a little plug. But It's a new personal finance site. I was brought on by Acorns late last year from CNBC to start this site from scratch, which is kind of an incredible opportunity. So we launched in January, and it's really it's separate from Acorns. It's its own editorial site, and we sort of aim at millennials, but I think the lessons there are good for anyone. So I'd love to hear what you guys think if you check it out. We're always thrilled to get feedback from any readers that go on this site, and we do incorporate a lot of feedback we get as we make changes and the site evolves. So I think we've put the website there. So
Great.
check it out. Let me know what you think.
We'll send out that link as well. And I want to thank you, Jennifer, for a really excellent presentation. And I want to thank everyone who joined us today and asked questions. We hope you'll join us again. And thanks again so much, Jen.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.